Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kevin Moss, and I'm a policy advisor here at the Western Governors Association. Welcome to today's webinar announcing Oregon Governor Brown's Electric Vehicles Roadmap Initiative. This signature policy effort of Governor Brown as WGA Chair is designed to pursue opportunities to improve the planning, siting, and coordination of electric vehicles infrastructure in Western states. The webinar will consist of a keynote address by Governor Brown, followed by presentations on the West Coast Electric Highway and regional electric vehicles for the West Plan. We will then host a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. To send in questions, please use the chat box function on the left side of the screen and address them to the presenters. You may send in questions at any point, and I will incorporate them into the Q&A. Thank you again for tuning in, and at this point, I'll turn it over to Jim Ogsbury, WGA's Executive Director, to introduce Governor Brown. Jim, take it away when you're ready.
Thanks very much, Kevin. It is no small honor for me to participate in the launch of Oregon Governor Kate Brown's WGA Chair initiative to create an electric vehicles roadmap for Western states. Over the past several years, WGA Chair initiatives have played an increasingly large role in the life of the association. They're consuming a growing measure of time, energy, and resources. And this circumstance is obtained because our chairs are visionaries who are addressing critical challenges in the West, and their initiatives have been demonstrably successful in confronting those challenges. A distinguishing characteristic of these projects is that they drive to action. Recent examples establish the case. So the Western Governors National Forest and Rangeland Management Initiative of Montana Governor Steve Bullock, for example, produced a raft of legislative recommendations that were enacted by Congress to substantially improve public land management regimes. The Biosecurity and Invasive Species Initiative of Hawaii Governor David Ige continues to yield a host of actionable deliverables, including the formation of the Western Governors Invasive Species Council, a governor-appointed body of experts and land managers charged with coordinating invasive species control efforts on a regional level. Reimagining the Rural West, the initiative of our immediate past chair, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, has spawned 3 WGA policy resolutions, and it will inform our work in rural prosperity issues for years to come. The Electric Vehicles Roadmap Initiative will be no different with respect to producing meaningful outcomes, and it is a privilege to introduce the architect of this important project. I don't know when I've been more excited to introduce a newly minted chair of WGA. Last month, Governor Kate Brown of Oregon was unanimously elected by Western governors to lead the association, and a bloodless transfer of power subsequently transpired on July 1st, the beginning of WGA's program year. Governor Brown is not only whip smart, a courageous leader, and a strategic thinker, she's also warm, relatable, and compassionate. She's also innovative. When COVID-19 turned our world upside down, Governor Brown immediately apprehended that we would need to act quickly to create new ways of doing business, new means of generating value. And she offered thoughtful and specific recommendations to improve WGA programming in a dramatically changing environment. It is that visionary inclination and tendency toward innovation that animates the Electric Vehicles Roadmap Initiative, a project that Governor Brown has been scoping and designing and redesigning during the past year as Vice Chair of WGA. And now it's time to get started in earnest, and I can't wait. Accordingly, I am honored to introduce the new Chair of WGA, the 38th Governor of the great state of Oregon, the Honorable Kate Brown.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Jim. I'm just honored and delighted to be with all of you today, even under these circumstances. I would, of course, much rather be celebrating with all of you in person, but unfortunately, COVID-19 obviously had different plans for all of us. Yet, it's under these circumstances that the WGA and my predecessor, Governor Burgum, managed to complete one of the most ambitious chairs initiatives in recent memory. The work of reimagining the rural West has redefined how we approach an issue every state in the West has in common: the vitality of our rural communities. Participants from across the West helped to develop a comprehensive set of recommendations to lift up our rural economies in order to lift up the economic health of our entire states. I encourage you to visit www.westgov.org in order to review Reimagining the Rural West report. You can also review recently passed Western Governor's policy resolutions on rural development, Western agriculture, and broadband connectivity. I think it was unanimous. Governor Burgum's initiative is emblematic of the WGA as a whole. No matter which side of the aisle governors come from, we all recognize the importance of providing opportunity to every single person and every single community in our states. It's with this intention that WGA governors approach our work together, that in this space, we put aside the political differences that play out nationally and instead put the people of the West above all else. And when we do this, what we were able to accomplish together becomes an example for the entire country. My chair's initiative was developed through this lens, an issue that states across the West are already working on, both individually and collaboratively, an issue that bolsters our current economies and creates a roadmap, both literally and figuratively, to the future. Across the West, states are working to encourage the use of electric vehicles by both consumers and businesses. That's because we all recognize that a robust and efficient transportation sector is key to meeting economic goals and to connecting businesses to regional and international markets. This matter is especially important as the cost of accessing these markets increases. The use of electric vehicles also allows us to power our transportation system with energy produced right here in our Western states. As we all know, the wind on our plains, the sun on our deserts, and the water in our rivers are all less subject to the global geopolitical forces that influence oil markets. The good news is that collaborative efforts are well on their way already. We have the West Coast Electric Highway and the Regional Electric Vehicle Plan for the West. The West Coast Electric Highway is an agreement amongst California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia to ensure that there are enough charging stations along the length of the entire I-5 to allow electric vehicle users to travel the length of the West Coast with the same certainty they would have if they were driving a gas vehicle. But Oregon, Washington, and California aren't alone. Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming have all joined together to create the Rev West. Their work is to make it possible to operate an EV as one travels across the Intermountain West. It's a great and shining example of bipartisan collaboration. These efforts are born out of a mutual understanding that facilitating the use of electric vehicles isn't a political imperative. It's an economic one, making it easier for both consumers and businesses to travel and transport goods using electric vehicles frees up household incomes and yields increased profits. I believe that today we are on the precipice of a historic transition. Coordinated planning and investment around EV infrastructure today can unlock new potential across the entire West. However, one thing stands in the way of achieving this goal. According to a 2019 poll conducted by Volvo, a principal barrier to purchasing an EV remains range anxiety. The fear that a vehicle will run out of power before reaching its destination or another charging point. We know that an increased number of EV charging stations would be a primary factor in improving a consumer or business's likelihood of purchasing an EV. Ensuring that charging stations are interoperable across vehicle types is a crucial aspect of creating improved networks of EV infrastructure. Increased planning and collaboration on a regional basis can address many of the challenges associated with range anxiety and interoperability. These efforts will require coordination among state energy offices, state departments of transportation, utilities, federal agencies, local governments, EV manufacturers, and charging station providers and operators. My chair's initiative, as Jim said, known as the Electric Vehicles Roadmap, will seek to coordinate technical aspects between existing sub-regional EV collaboratives and encourage participation from Western states not yet engaged in EV network planning. Our goal is to make progress towards or achieve an expanded regional agreement on EV charging infrastructure by the WGA 2021 annual meeting, hopefully in Sun River, Oregon. Fortunately, we're already well on our way. Many of you have participated in the scoping process for my initiative, and from your feedback, we've identified some constructive areas to work on over the next year. Initiative work sessions will be held on a regular basis and will focus on specific areas for potential coordination between states. We hope to discuss the use of financial incentives to encourage the placement of charging stations, voluntary minimum standards among charging platforms, and streamlining regulatory processes and fees. The creation of a collaborative, consistent siting processes that include the input of both public and private partners. Opportunities to support the growing medium and heavy-duty electric vehicle sectors. Strategies to address electricity pricing challenges for commercial and residential electric vehicle users. How governors and states can support both battery electric vehicles and fuel cells EVs. And policy strategies to support the successful integration of EV fleets in both urban and rural markets. As we discuss these considerations, I ask us to explore how can we hold ourselves accountable to the success of any potential agreement. An agreement is only successful as its implementation. And I would like each party to be equally committed to the expansion of EV infrastructure across the West. This work is truly emblematic of the spirit of the Western Governors Association, building on the successful efforts of individual states to create mutual benefit for all of us. I look forward to today's discussion of how the two existing regional agreements came to fruition and how we might structure ourselves to work towards a unified electric West. Jim, back to you, and thanks again, everybody, for participating.
Thank you very much, Governor Brown. Our next speaker is Tonya Buell, one of the original co-creators of the West Coast Electric Highway. She started working on alternative fuels a decade ago and was instrumental in taking the concept of highway corridor charging to implementation. Tonya also spearheaded the branding and marketing for the West Coast Electric Highway. She works for the Innovative Partnerships Office at the Washington State Department of Transportation, where she manages Washington's EV Highway Corridor Network. Tonya is on the board of the Women of Electric Vehicles and is the Vice President of Plug-in America. Please welcome Tonya as she presents an overview of the West Coast Electric Highway. Tonya, I'm going to bring up your slides right now, and then you can begin when you're ready.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Kevin, for the introduction, and good afternoon, webinar participants. It is my pleasure to join you today. And I'd actually like to start out with a big thank you to the Western Governors Association for hosting today's launch event, and commend you, Governor Brown, for your vision and for leading the charge. And I know you could select any initiative you wanted, and I'm just thrilled that you've chosen Electric Vehicles Roadmap as your initiative for this year. States that work together to electrify our transportation system can have a significant impact, and your leadership is so important. We are reaching the tipping point for mass adoption of electric vehicles, and coordination among the Western states on policy, infrastructure, and best practices will help us be EV ready. And Governor Brown, I just want you to know that some of the most talented electric vehicle experts and pioneers in the field are from Oregon. In particular, the Oregon Department of Transportation's Office of Innovation is a close partner with WSDOT's Innovative Partnerships Office, and we've been working together for years on developing the West Coast Electric Highway. I'm also looking forward to working with ODOT's new Climate Office. And Oregon also has excellent staff at the Departments of Energy, Environmental Quality. The ZEVIWIG group of stakeholders is doing great work. The Columbia Willamette Clean Cities Coalition is a great resource. And of course, Fourth hosts a fantastic annual roadmap conference in Portland, bringing experts from around the globe to share information on autonomous, connected, shared, and electric vehicles. So I'm just so pleased to be working with Oregon on this initiative. And today I'm going to be talking about the background of West Coast Electric Highway, how we coordinate efforts among the states and the province of BC, and then talk a little bit about what's on the horizon and how we can prepare for the future. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Unfortunately, it's not letting me, oh, there we go. All right, so the Pacific Coast Collaborative includes our governors from Washington, Oregon, and California, and the Premier of British Columbia, and also several West Coast cities. We are working with the cities of Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Oakland, and Los Angeles, all working together to build a low carbon economy of the future. And we really support all fuels. Today I'm going to be focusing on electric vehicle charging, but this group works on hydrogen fuel cell refueling and all fuels. And the Pacific Coast Climate Leadership Action Plan was actually first started in 2008. So we've been working together for a while on this. So this is a picture of the West Coast Electric Highway. It primarily started as the I-599 corridor, but we've added additional major highway corridors to the mix. And our goal with the West Coast Electric Highway is to accelerate EV adoption. When people know there's charging available, they're more likely to purchase and drive an electric vehicle. And we want to be able to connect these communities that have robust charging networks. And really our goal is to have a seamless EV driver experience. We want drivers, no matter if they're driving in Washington, Oregon, or California, or up all the way up to Whistler, that they have a consistent experience with equipment, signage, branding, and marketing. And one thing people don't necessarily realize about the West Coast Electric Highway, it's really a common vision on having charging available for the EV driving public. And the funding comes from all different sources. For example, in California, a lot of the funding came from the California Energy Commission through highway corridor grants. Let me talk about the original West Coast Electric Highway. One thing that makes the West Coast Electric Highway so unique is that this was the first and most robust, longest charging network in the nation, covering 3 states and up into British Columbia. And we started out with 56 charging locations, the bulk in Oregon and about a dozen in Washington. And our goal was to have locations every 35 to 50 miles, so people could travel longer distances. We don't really expect people to travel the whole route, although some people do, mainly for regional or longer commutes or road trips. The original equipment that was installed in 2012 were AeroVironment DC fast chargers, along with some level 2 equipment. And we were actually able to get this started because of Recovery Act funding through the State Energy Program. So Washington and Oregon both used State Energy Program funding for the initial I-5 and major corridors. And then Oregon was able to secure Tiger II funding and expand out to more rural areas and along the coast. And you can imagine covering 1,350 miles along the West Coast Electric Highway, there are a lot of different utilities along the route. So we have been learning lots of lessons that we can share with you. And here's a photo of some of the original sites in Washington State. The locations range from outlet malls to grocery stores, restaurants, and fueling stations. And one thing you'll note is that the original stations built in 2012 only have the CHAdeMO connectors, because at that time, that was the only major standard. We also have sites along some of our east-west corridors out to our more rural areas and tourism routes. And we've learned a lot over the years, and we've been working together, all the partners in British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and California, and have agreed upon some basic guidelines on what EV drivers should expect when they get to a charging station. Our primary goal is to have accessible, reliable charging infrastructure available when EV drivers need it. We are very pleased that we are actually able to reach and exceed our goal that Governor Inslee set several years ago, and that goal was to get 50,000 electric vehicles on our roads by 2020. Now we have nearly 60,000, and it's really because of the forward-thinking legislators with the great policies. We've had EV incentives in place since 2009, and we keep coming up with more ways to increase EV adoption. And these are some of the things that were in our 5-year plan, and that's probably time for a refresh. So this is great that WGA and Governor Brown have this initiative. Now we have been actually using funding from EV drivers themselves to install more charging. Just last year, we installed 15 new locations working with public and private partners. We had $1 million from the legislature that we were able to leverage to get another $1.5 million worth of investment. So we had $2.5 million with combined funds, and we're able to reach out on new roadways. So for the first time ever, EV drivers could get from Seattle to the Tri-Cities. Down on the map, it's in the bottom right. So that's really exciting, and we've already seen an increase in EV adoption in those regions. We've learned a lot, and with this last grant funding, we made requirements that sites needed to have both CHAdeMO and combo charging, and this is what some of the stations look like along I-5. And then here are some of the stations out in eastern Washington. And the newer sites are even, things get better and better. Now we have locations where we have solar canopies or are co-located with Tesla, and we're really looking for innovation and transformative programs. Signage is a big issue. Thanks to the Oregon Department of Transportation, several years ago, we were able to get an alternative symbol for electric vehicle charging to put along our highways. The original MUTCD symbol was just a gas pump with the letters EV, and we thought that this would be a better way to communicate EV charging. And so we've adopted this in British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, California, and I've seen this adopted nationwide, and it was the hard work of the Oregon DOT to get approval for this. We work with a lot of partners. As Governor Brown mentioned, it takes working with utilities and car manufacturers, retailers, federal and state and city governments all working together to make this a success. These are just some of the partners for Washington State for our segments of the West Coast Electric Highway. And it's really important to have support at the governor's level. Our Governor, Jay Inslee, has been there with us when we just had the concept of the West Coast Electric Highway and trying to find funding when he was just a congressman, and he's continued his support. He comes out to our events and helps get media attention for the charging infrastructure, so we can let people know that that it's a priority for our state. We also want to make sure we have a smooth transition, seamless transition for EV drivers, whether they're crossing the state line or going over international borders. These are photos from an event that we had at the Peace Arch State Park, where 9 different electric vehicle drivers made the trek from British Columbia down to Baja, California, and we had an event, a plug, where we plugged in to connect our fast charging networks, a golden plug ceremony. And so this is another way to get publicity, is to have events and actually have people drive and have all electric road rallies. Things change so fast in this space. Vehicles are getting more mileage to the charge. There's a lot more makes and models available, new ones coming out. It seems like there are announcements from all the major automakers, and we are also starting to see medium heavy duty increase in this space. And with the highway charging infrastructure, we are seeing the need for more charging, faster charging, and with Washington State, we've now added hydrogen fuel cell vehicle fueling to our grant program as an eligible project, and there's a lot going on, and so it's very exciting to be in this space right now. There are lots of resources out there already and that states can take advantage of, and here's some links to some of those. And I want to highlight the work that the Federal Highways Department is doing for really working to get connectivity nationwide on major interstates and major roadways. And as you can see, if you look on the far left in the West Coast states, you can see that we have the green shows EV charging ready corridors. And so we have a really good start, and we're expanding out from there. But this is an excellent tool for seeing what you have now and what you might want to plan for in the future. And with that, I'm looking forward to this initiative where we're able to bring West Coast Electric Highway and Rev West together, working together to coordinate efforts with these programs and with the other Western Governors Association states. And the West is the best, and you'll get to hear more now from Katie on Rev West. Thanks for your time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tonya. That was a really, really helpful overview of Washington and the coastal states' efforts, so thank you so much for that. Our next speaker is Katie Pagan. Katie is the Energy Program Manager for the Idaho Governor's Office of Energy and Mineral Resources. She serves as Idaho's state lead for electric vehicles planning and its interactions with the Rev West agreement. Katie also serves on the National Association of State Energy Officials Transportation Committee. NASIO is the organization that manages the Rev West MOU, and WGA would like to thank them for their leadership in this space. Katie, thank you for joining us today, and take it away when you're ready. I'll click to your slide.
Thanks, Kevin. My name, like Kevin said, is Katie Pagan, and I was asked to talk a little bit about the Regional Vehicle Plan for the West, or more commonly referred to as Rev West, and then to give a brief overview of what Idaho State is working on as far as electric highway infrastructure or electric vehicle infrastructure. So as far as the Rev West group goes, there are 8 participating states. As you can see, they're the Intermountain West states, and this was a group that was established under a voluntary MOU in 2017, and we recently reestablished commitments to the group under another voluntary MOU in 2019 when all of the member states' current governors signed that MOU. The goal is for connecting the region's major travel corridors. In the map, you can see that we are focusing on interstates, but there are states that are looking at some major state highways that would connect from one state to the next. For Idaho, that would be the U.S. highways 95 and 93 that run into Nevada and Montana. The idea is that we want to try and avoid an electric highway to nowhere, so that someone traveling from, say, Las Vegas could go up to Glacier National Park without ever having to worry about being stranded somewhere along their route. So each state is addressing these concerns differently. Some are more robust than other states, but together we are addressing region-wide issues, and some examples include rural corridor electrification. So a lot of the states in this region have large areas of rural highway infrastructure, and a couple of things that we've been working on include talking to the Federal Highway Administration about potentially readjusting their requirements for electric corridor ready corridors. There is a requirement of 50 miles between stations, and in certain rural spaces that is potentially not a possibility because there may not be a safe location, or there just may not be any potential spots to place a station within 50 miles of the last station. So we're looking at potentially having an urban and rural requirements that would differentiate between the different locations on a highway. Another another action that we're looking at is with a DOE-funded grant called Core West. We are doing a study of barriers for rural electrification. So each state is working with their rural state stakeholders, and hopefully there will be a questionnaire out soon that will look at some of those barriers. We have also looked at encouraging similar station standards. So on the NASIO Rev West website, there is a voluntary minimum standards document that the states have worked together to say, we are going to try and have each of our stations follow these standards to the best of our abilities so that someone could travel through states without needing several different applications or some sort of other device to keep them going when they're looking for electric vehicle charging options. We are also sharing best practices amongst ourselves in monthly calls to help each other find ways around potential issues that each state might be facing. As far as Idaho's work goes on EV infrastructure, we are continuing to collaborate with partners like Rev West and Electrify America so that we may avoid duplicating our efforts. We want to make sure that the funding that we do have available for EV charging infrastructure is spread across the state and not necessarily focused in areas that might get more funding than others. Some of the things that we're looking at for the state include using the 15% of Volkswagen settlement funding on highway build-out for fast charger stations. So we're looking to fill in gaps to cover Idaho's major corridors, which are listed on the map on the slide. We're also looking to coordinate with stakeholders on possible discussions for additional efforts, such as EV pilot programs for our electric utilities that are interested in providing options for their customers within Idaho. And then also, as I said, working with the Core West group to look at rural charging studies that could help address some of the barriers that we see in our rural communities. And with that, I'll hand it back to Kevin for some question and answers.
Great, thank you, Katie. That was a great overview. Like Katie indicated, we will now transition to the Q&A portion of the webinar, and we've already received a lot of questions from you all, so thank you for being active participants, and feel free to keep sending in questions as we go. But Governor Brown, this one is for you. One audience member was just curious about the state electric vehicle fleet investments that the state of Oregon has made, and any challenges that you all had with getting those vehicles on the road. So Governor Brown, if you could address that, and then Tony and Katie, feel free to jump in afterwards with any comments about fleet investments in Idaho and Washington.
Thank you. I set forth similar goals to transition for EV vehicles, both for private consumers and then for the state system as well. Given the COVID-19 crisis, at least on the private side, we're struggling to meet our goals, which included 50,000 EVs by 2020. But we're working hard to reach that goal. In terms of our public system, we're working on that as well. But for us, one of the challenges is making sure that we have the EV infrastructure in communities around the state. And you could see from the West Coast Electric Highway that it is primarily dominated by the I-5 corridor. And so making sure that we have the infrastructure and the technology beyond the I-5 corridor is absolutely key for us if we want to move forward and make progress.
Great, thank you, Governor Brown. Tony or Katie, any comments from you on fleet investments in your respective states?
Yeah, a couple things I wanted to mention. One is that Washington Governor Inslee has a state EV fleets initiative with a target of 50% of all new passenger vehicle purchases must be plug-in electric. And we also have a working group called the State Efficiency and Environmental Performance Group, and they're working to install charging for state agencies and encourage EV adoption. Basically, anytime a state agency wants to replace a vehicle or purchase a vehicle, they need to first consider a zero emission vehicle. Another thing I wanted to mention is through the Pacific Coast Collaborative, there is a group called West Coast Electric Fleets that provides resources for public and private fleets with the goal of having at least 10% of a vehicle fleet as electric.
Great, thanks, Tonya. Tonya, I'm going to stick with you for this next question that came in during your presentation. Someone is wondering, how is the spacing of chargers along corridors determined? And do you think that this spacing need is changing as EV ranges continue to grow?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I think some really good guidance comes from the Federal Highways Alternative Fuel Corridors, and they recommend that EV charging is placed in 50-mile intervals along the highways, and then for hydrogen fuel cell refueling at 100-mile intervals, because you can go farther on a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. When we first developed the West Coast Electric Highway, really the only vehicles that were available were the Nissan Leaf and the Mitsubishi i-MiEV, and at the time they could only go 60 to 100 miles on a charge, and so we made the decision to have those every 25 to 50 miles. So we've probably expanded the space between the charging stations, but I think it's important to fill in, especially on areas where there might be a lot of usage. So there's important to have duplication and have a lot of chargers. I think now that more people are using their electric vehicles to travel longer distances and are not tethered to just their local commute, I think people are expecting to have more charging available on the roadways. So the more charging, the better.
Great, thanks, Tonya. Katie, I'm going to come to you for this next one, which is we've gotten a couple comments from the audience about just kind of the general challenges with transmission and distribution of electricity for increased demand with EVs. So could you just kind of quickly talk about how the state of Idaho works with either utilities or electric cooperatives in your state in terms of EV planning and just kind of what those interactions generally look like?
Sure. So the state of Idaho actually has an advisory group that includes all of our investor-owned electric utilities as well as our electric cooperative. And it originally started out as an advisory group for our Volkswagen EVSE program. It has kind of expanded to more of an advisory group discussing potential questions that the state faces with EV infrastructure. And so it's really any kind of statewide question, such as one of our investor-owned utilities is interested in doing an EV pilot program within their Idaho service territory and wanted to get some sort of feedback from the state stakeholders on that. And so they've used that advisory group to kind of feel out what Idaho customers might want. And so that's kind of where the state has worked with their utilities as more of a partner of looking at potential options that would work in Idaho.
Great, thanks, Katie. Governor Brown or Tonya, any comments on your state's interactions with utilities in either Oregon or Washington? Okay, that's fine. Governor Brown, I'm going to pivot to another question for you from the audience, and this one just essentially says that, given that low-income, minority, and, rural communities traditionally lag behind affluent urban areas in terms of EVs adoption, do you see any opportunities to promote equitable access to EVs and charging infrastructure as this sector continues to develop?
Absolutely. We did a specific tax credit for moderate and low income Oregonians as part of our transportation package. It has been successful, and I think that all of us as governors are really focused on how we can support, provide resources and tools for our historically underserved communities of color and our low-income communities. And I think we can do that now moving forward with similar types of systems like we used in our transportation package to give incentives for low and moderate income purchasers moving forward. I also think, honestly, it's an opportunity to prioritize the needs of the folks that are really struggling families. And another system that we've talked about, including EV charging into, is we are building affordable housing. And I know, frankly, all the states throughout the West are struggling with housing issues. As we build and invest in affordable housing, I think it's absolutely key that we put in the EV infrastructure while we're developing our housing projects across the state.
Awesome. Thank you, Governor Brown. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and Tonya, I'm going to start with you on this one. So a lot of our questions and comments have been focused on the role of hydrogen fueling infrastructure and fuel cell electric vehicles. So Tonya, one person was interested in learning more about the program that you mentioned that has recently added hydrogen as a funding availability source. And then once you answer that, if you could just kind of give your, some general thoughts on the role of hydrogen moving forward in the EV space. And then Governor Brown and Katie, I encourage you to jump in as well at the end of Tonya's comments.
Sure, you bet. The program in Washington State, we call the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Partnerships Program, ZEVIP. And the goal of that program is to incentivize the private sector to invest in EV charging and hydrogen fuel cell refueling. And so we have a small amount of funds. Right now, the legislature approved basically $1 million a year over 6 years. So it's not a lot of funding, and especially when you compare the cost of a DC fast charger maybe at $100,000 each on average, and hydrogen fueling stations are maybe tenfold that. But we really want to work with the industry and find ways that we can incorporate hydrogen fuel cell into our states, into the choices available for the state. And there are a lot of utilities that are interested in exploring that. I know at least one transit agency is working with one of our municipal power companies on an electric bus, hydrogen fuel cell electric bus. And we see a lot of promise in especially the medium and heavy duty areas. So right now it's tough because although we have 60,000 plug-in electric vehicles, we don't have any passenger hydrogen fuel cell vehicles yet in our state. But it's something that we definitely want to develop a path forward for hydrogen fuel cell. And there are a couple of studies that came out from some key partners. One is the Western, I can't think of the name of it right now, but there's a West Coast collaborative medium heavy duty study that came out that highlighted potential locations for all alternative fuels, and there were a number of suggested locations for hydrogen fuel cell refueling. So it's an area that we definitely want to start exploring and see how we can work together on expanding California's hydrogen highway all the way up and down the coast.
Hi,
Great,
this is Governor Brown. Kevin, if I'll just jump in here really quickly. And I'll just be brief. I've been watching the comments in the chat room, and I'm well aware that we've got folks who are very interested in fuel cell EVs and hydrogen technology. I am more than willing to have future workshops include this technology in the conversation. And I don't know if that would be one program or multiple, but happy to include this as we move forward on workshops on this topic.
Great, thank you, Governor Brown. And I agree. I think that would be worthy of a lot of examination. And Katie, I'm going to pivot to you really quickly for a quick question, just with the Idaho perspective and the fact that there are a lot of rural communities in Idaho. Are you hearing, any interest from rural constituents about, medium or heavy duty trucks and any, applications that they might have in kind of common rural industries in Idaho?
We haven't really heard any interest for necessarily heavy or medium duty trucking for EVs. We have heard interest in EV infrastructure in rural communities as potentially for a tourism opportunity to invite people to visit the community, spend some time in some of the shops as they wait for their vehicle to charge. But as far as we've heard, we haven't had any kind of conversations around medium or heavy duty in the rural communities yet. Okay,
thanks, Katie. Governor Brown, I'm going to pivot back to you for this question from the audience, and then Tony and Katie, feel free to jump in on the back end. So it says, given the challenging budget situation many states are facing in the wake of COVID-19, how will this impact financial incentives for EVs and utilities? On a related note, do you expect consumers to be more price sensitive to the higher cost of EVs?
Certainly, given the challenging state of the economy, I certainly expect consumers to be probably financially challenged over the next few months, and our numbers are showing next couple of years. However, I do think EVs provide a really great return on investment, both in terms of not having to find and gas up, but also in terms of the future. And so I am hoping we can continue to make the case that this is a really good buy, and it makes sense both economically and in terms of the future climate issues that we're facing to go this route. In terms of states, again, I'm assuming most of the Western states. I did talk to Governor Burgum earlier today. I suspect they're also seeing financial challenges, even with limited number of COVID cases. But most of the Western states are going to be facing, frankly, really challenging budget situations. And I guess from my perspective, under this financial scenario, it really makes sense for us to prioritize and make sure that we are getting the best bang for our taxpayer dollars. And I would say by investing in EVs for our state fleet makes absolutely the most sense. because then we can be reliant on energy produced in the Western region as opposed to energy produced in other countries. And so I just think it makes sense to prioritize and focus, and this direction should be the one that I hope all the states, but particularly the Western region, will be moving forward toward.
Outstanding. Thank you, Governor Brown. Tony or Katie, do you have any comments on potential budget cuts within your states and, associated effects on EVs investments?
Well, I wanted to mention that we're fortunate that there is this national Volkswagen settlement that's really transformative for getting a lot of the infrastructure that we need. In Washington State, Governor Inslee designated our Department of Ecology as the administrator, and we were able to secure for Washington about $112 million in funding, and our Department of Ecology has already awarded more than half of that. And with it, we've been able to have funding to electrify our ferry vessels. We've been able to help transit systems purchase 66 new transit electric buses. We've been put the whole 15% allowable into EV charging along our highway corridors and at state agency facilities. We also have a state settlement that is helping state agencies purchase electric vehicles. And then just for the general public, we do have the sales tax incentive. It has been traditionally for just new electric vehicles, but our legislators expanded that for used electric vehicles. And so hopefully those incentives will help.
Great. Thank you, Tonya. Well, that about does it for the time that we have allotted today. I will recognize that a few folks asked about just essentially potential impacts on grid planning and operations, and also encourage WGA and the governors to look at various rate charging structures and electric vehicles for both residential and business users. And those are certainly issues that we'll be exploring through the initiative work sessions. So with that, I'd like to thank Governor Brown, our speakers, and all of the listeners for joining today. WGA has recorded this webinar, and a recording and a PDF of the slides will be available on our website, www.westgov.org, within the next 24 hours. WGA will also be sharing more information about project work sessions in the coming weeks. Thank you again for listening in, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. Be safe out there.
Thanks, Governor Brown.